McGillicuddy and Murder's Pawn Shop, Season 5, Episode 17. If you want to know who did it, it was I. October 31st, 1921. Continued. Diary, we stepped through the eye symbol in that field, and I was furious at how beautiful everything was. It was a perfect night. The moon was glowing like nectar, and tall grass around us whispered as only dry October grass can. It was the perfect end of cool, as if nature had scraped a bit of Antarctic stardust into the air. I shivered and stamped my feet, and very nearly burst into tears. I didn't know what to do with all my feelings. I had a lot of them. So I paced. Wrath was gone. We had left him there. We had left him in the Whiskalit world to seal the spell, and no form of magic in the world could bring him back. Mara sat down with her head between her knees in the grass and cried. I was glad we were in the middle of nowhere. No traffic cops telling us to move along. I ached like the dickens. I loved that infuriating man, that mad, glorious soul. I rubbed my arms, and only then did I even remember that I was still disappearing. We had solved his story, but not mine, and Wrath's story didn't feel like a victory. We should have been scrambling to heal him from his cadaver poisoning, not weeping in a meadow. Suddenly, something came over me. There was a kind of jasmine smell in the air, and I almost felt like something had jabbed me very hard in the stomach, as if to remind me of something. I didn't think it would work, but I just howled, I wish he was here. And suddenly, Hester Rathbone, no longer looking like a Whiskalit, tumbled into the grass beside us. Mara screamed. Noble stanced off, worried that this wasn't Wrath. Wrath looked around wildly and then yelled like a banshee. I think he could have been heard for miles. "Is it really you?" Wrath shouted at all of us. "Is it really you?" I shouted at him. He gulped and touched his stomach. That was simply wild. What did you do?" "I just wished that you were here," I said. "Well, that is not possible, Melinda Maudie Merkel," Wrath said. "I finished that spell. It is done, sealed, kaput. I made sure of that. No one can break it unless they're standing in the Whiskalit world, which of course none of us are. So how do you explain how I got here?" The jasmine smell that had surrounded me reminded me of something, and suddenly I realized what had happened, and I knelt down in the grass with my face in my hands, and I laughed until I was hysterical. They all sat around me. Mara and Wrath held each other's arms and hands and didn't seem to know who got to rest whose head on the other person's shoulder. They were a bit like wriggling puppies. I finally stopped laughing long enough to explain. "Diary, do you see what happened? Remember when I gave Wrath that awkward hug around the neck before we went off on our expeditions? Well, some of his hair must have gotten on my sleeve. Remember way back to the beginning of this story, when I unlocked the box of Dolores' grandmother, and that dormant magic unusual power was released? Well, the power didn't go into Dolores. It went into me. All this time, I've been carrying 2 unique magic unusual powers, and one was the ability to pull someone to me, no matter the distance or difficulty or spell, as long as I had some of their hair. It seemed Dolores' grandmother's power was even more powerful than we knew, because it had summoned Wrath outside of the laws of magic. It simply worked, no matter what. Despite Whiskalit magic, despite our magic. I explained all this to my friends, and we collapsed backwards into the grass like adolescents, laughing and shocked at how, despite all the bad luck in the world, sometimes things spin in your favor. It was Dolores' grandmother in the end, of course. She must have sensed that I needed this. Perhaps the decades of unuse had made this power teem with energy, enough for one glorious burst of something impossible. I owed a lot to her. Wrath was with us again. Diary, I'm running out of pages. It is very soon to the end. Not of my adventures, but of this one. After we realized Wrath was back with us, and we'd gotten over the shock, we realized that he was technically still dying, and we sprang into action. He was no longer turning into a Whiskelet, because he had broken that contract with his spell. But the cadaver was very much still in him, infecting him with its own death. Octavia knew exactly what spells to use, and we had a sort of encore to the previous adventure, scurrying to the homes of magic unusuals, pounding on their doors in the dead of night, demanding to get a bit of magic to save a life. An hour later, when Wrath was quite weak, but dozily chatting in Mara's arms, hanging on, I think, because of the overwhelming sense of how much life awaited him, we gave him the potion. He drank it up, his second in a day, and said he felt much better. His strength was back in about 20 minutes, and when Scotland checked his blood, it was red while liquid, and glowed when dry. He was wholly himself again, and no longer dying. And it comforted me that at least I got to see one story that ended well. It didn't matter that we had made the Whiskelet's worst fear come true anyway. They had still set into motion the magic that would stop me from existing. I knew that I would not last forever, but I didn't want Dolores' grandmother's power to vanish with me. I said goodbye for now to my friends and teleported back to Brazil, made my way into her shop front, and waited in the glow of her parlour for her to arrive. She appeared shortly, and she stopped in her tracks when she saw me. Diary, the look on her face. She knew. She knew the power had passed to me and not her. I think your grandmother wanted you to have the power all along, I said, but she knew I needed it for something first. It should... I stepped closer. The smell of jasmine filled the air again, and with a gentle slide, I felt the power leave me. Dolores' face brightened. Well, she said, as long as she really does trust me in the end. Of course she does, I said, and I left. After that, I didn't want to return to my friends. I kept thinking about what Ariana had done, and if it could be undone. Such a small gesture. Preventing a teacup from breaking. Then suddenly, I got a mad idea, and I decided I might as well try it. I went back to my friends. We went to the secret basement together, and they helped me find a murder object that would get me to 1916, about an hour before John died. I arrived, and then teleported to Mara's apartment, keeping out of the way. I knew Ariana would be here soon, attempting to ruin all of this. She was not here yet, however. I hid in the kitchen and waited until John arrived. John walked through the door. He looked startled to see me. He was also sick, and he knew it. The poison that would kill him was already at work. "Hello," he said, rather bravely, considering. "I don't know you." "Hello, John," I said. He walked up to the table. He picked up the teacup, full of coffee, and took a sip. I could tell he was in pain, but he was riding it gracefully, living the most ordinary moment that he could. "Listen," he said, "I don't want my friends to be in pain. Tell them I love them. But I've just done a funny thing. I've written words that nobody can see. A spell. A pretty horrible spell. I had to tell the secret to someone, so I just wrote the words. But I made the words invisible to everyone. Except I had to make them visible to just one person in order to tell the secret and get it off my chest. Just one person. So I made the spell visible to the last good-hearted person who would see me alive. I think that might be you. Would that be all right? You can ignore the words. They're in the pawn shop. But you might end up being the only person in the world who can see them. Death to all mice. The letters. I had seen them because I was the last person to see John alive, apart from Ariana, perhaps, who did not count as good-hearted. He gave the secret to me. And we had done all right with it, in the end. We had wounded the Whiskelets in an incredible way, because almost through an accident, John had given the spell not to the night enthusiasts, but to me. "Can I do anything for you, John?" I asked. "Make the world better," he winced, "and tell my daughter I adore her. I will, I said. I knew Ariana would be here any minute. John shut his eyes. He wanted privacy. He wanted this moment to gather himself. He was going to crumple, fall soon, and it felt strange to stand and watch. I stepped down the hall and out of sight. I shut my eyes. I heard Ariana arrive. I heard John fall. Then the kitchen went silent, and I went back in. Ariana was already gone, but she had left the unsmashed teacup sitting on the counter, whole and quaint. I winced a little, but also felt a strong stab of pride for the adventures to come. I felt close to John's spirit, almost as if he was there. There was a lot of pain ahead in this timeline, but we were on the other side of it now, ready for good. I had to get to the good. I picked up the teacup and tried to reenact John's fall as much as I could. I fell straight onto it. It was a delicate thing, and I was worried I'd torn it to powder. I scrambled up, sure the eye would be in crumbles, but it was exactly the same, diary. As if this was how it had been broken in the first place. The blue eye still gazed up at me, whole and unblinking. The shape I knew so well. I held it in the center of my palm. This moment, this first thing, was back. With so much tenderness, I set the broken pieces under John and left. I had not been stopped from interfering with time, and I think perhaps that was because time was very sick of being interfered with and approved of what I was doing. Time wanted to get back on track as much as I did. It took a little while after that to get to the exact right moment. Thank goodness I had you, diary, or I wouldn't have remembered the exact date. September 3rd, 1921. The entry was still there, from the day I found my little piece of McGillicuddy and Murders. I made it to September 3rd, 1921, just shy of 2 months ago, and I went into McGillicuddy and Murders pawn shop. I hoped I had the time all right. Suddenly, I saw me, Maud, walk up the staircase. I ducked behind a piano as fast as I could, heart hammering. The slant of sun in this place was golden and warm, buttery, and it smelled a little like going back in time. I was aware of the resin smell of the old wood, and the fragrance of dust, and the quiet creak of thousands of beautiful things. I heard the murmur of traffic outside, awooga horns and purring engines. I remembered how it felt to love this place, because it was the only thing I had. I had caught a glimpse of my expression. I had looked so far away. Like life itself was something I pulled away from, something I wanted to not do. Bruised little Maud. I felt such compassion for myself. I have been that girl, diary, truly. I have been lonely and battered, and over the course of writing in your pages, I have learned that I have value, promise, skill, ingenuity, and most of all that I want people and I want life, and I can have both of them. It has been such a journey, watching every heart filament come true as I write it down. But here I was, this was, thinking with quiet fondness of that Maud. The girl who began it all. She doubted herself, but nevertheless it was her. She started this adventure. Well, past Maud was upstairs, so I hurried to the front, where I had found the china eye, and I was surprised to see Mr. McGillicuddy. He didn't recognize me, of course. He bustled behind the desk and smiled vacantly at me as I went past. I checked, and the china eye was there, exactly where I'd found it. It had re-entered the timeline, and yet we had somehow always been in this timeline. Things had always happened this way. This wasn't a change. This was the beginning of the story that I knew. Mr. McGillicuddy, I said. He turned, surprised. How much is this eye? I said. Oh, he smiled. About 15 cents. Not too much. The price of a decent meal. But I knew old Maud would have balked at it. Walked away. telling herself she didn't need to spend 15 cents. "May I buy it?" I said. I felt a sweep of joy. "And you must know, I'm a magic unusual from the future. You're about to see me come by. But could you say nothing about this, and make sure I get this eye for free?" "A gift for your future," Mr. McGillicuddy said. He tutted pleasantly. "Why not?" I paid for the china eye. Then, diary, I wanted to watch, so I crept behind an enormous curtain 15 feet away, when I was sure no one was looking. Maud, me, arrived a few minutes later. She seemed dozy, disconnected, and she wandered from curiosity to curiosity. I watched this moment unfold, diary. Do you remember it? From the very beginning? I saw it in the corner by the checkout counter. It was just lying there by the golden bracelets, and I felt like it was looking at me. I mean, actually looking at me, like it had moved just before my eyes fell on it. I asked the old man behind the counter how much it was. He came around and looked at it. He picked it up, and a strange smile spread across his face. He seemed to love the old broken eye, and that made me feel a little less nervous about it. He told me it was free, that it had broken off something. He said I could have it. Free is exactly the sort of price I'm looking for. He dropped it into my hand, and I felt the strangest sense of dread. I watched as I turned and walked away. Mr. McGillicuddy went back to humming behind the counter. "Oh, Mr. McGillicuddy." Then I shut my eyes. I felt something coming over me, like a wave. Was I being erased? Was this the moment? Or was I possibly... Like someone gulping for air after being trapped underwater, I heaved for breath and my eyes snapped open. Every single one of my memories had roared through me in a flash. Everything stayed the same. I whipped you open, diary, hungry for the sight of missing entries, and every page was full again. I'd done it. I leaned back, ready to cry. I had put myself back in reality. It could have been so many things, but it was me. I was the one who made Melinda Maudie Merkel a magic unusual. There is a quote from Treasure Island, and it's always been one of my favorites. Jim Hawkins is in the worst sort of danger, surrounded by pirates, and they're probably going to kill him. But instead of being cowardly, he lists all the things that have gone wrong for the pirates, every plan that's been ruined. And then he says, "If you want to know who did it, it was I." I love that moment. I dreamed of one day saying, "It was I. I did this." I can say that. If you want to know who rescued you, who changed your life forever, Melinda Maudie Merkel, it was I. I felt as light as a bird as I stepped out of McGillicuddy and Murder's pawn shop. The Whiskalets were ruined. I was restored. I went back to my friends, and I wrote in my diary for a very long time. And I had a cup of tea. November 10th, 1921. Diary, I don't have very many pages left. There are so many stories about to happen, but I can't tell you about them in detail. We will just have to imagine, on this crisp and blustery November day, of all the good that will occur. Octavia and I went for a walk. We had just spent the last 4 hours cleaning up the secret basement of McGillicuddy and Murder's pawn shop with the other magic unusuals, who had begun to grow their souls back. It was tiring work. I was sneezy. "I think I'm about ready to say goodbye to my ghost," Octavia said. "Really?" I said. "That's a lot of healing in a short time." "Well, I'm not entirely back to normal, but I'm feeling quite solid," Octavia said. "I think when we sealed the Whiskalets up, it did something to that loyalty spell they cast. I don't like the night enthusiasts anymore. The others that I've talked to feel the same way. With the Whiskalets broken, their spell is pretty thin. So far, not everyone who used to belong to the pawn shop was back on our side, but we were having conversations day by day. People were coming back. Many of them were off on expeditions, like Noble, to find what they were missing. The rest of us were putting our home back. With the death of Don Mamungus and the loss of Whiskalet power, The night enthusiasts were scattered, and I was determined that we wouldn't be passive now. No more hiding. We would be active, do more. Use magic for good, not for passivity. We were going to see to it that the night enthusiasts never rose to power again. But yes, Octavia said, I'm getting closer to moving on into a new life, as a new but whole Octavia. Suddenly, she swerved. She giggled, and then Octavia kissed me gently on the lips. That doesn't mean anything, she said, just that you're a joy, and you deserve to be kissed. Oh, I said. My heart bubbled. Just what I'd been looking for. It was nice to be kissed by a girl. I was glad I got to write about it before this diary is over. Octavia and I kept walking. It was a pleasant silence. What's next for you? She said. I don't know, I said. I was open, as blank as a new book. I wasn't interested in pinning myself down to one particular future just now. My future could be as varied as a tangle of morning glories. I would let it grow wild. Have you heard from Ariana? Octavia said. No, I said. Diary, I will let you know that this is the last time Ariana gets mentioned in these pages. There is no heartfelt resolution, no sudden, perfect transformation of character for her, because it simply hasn't happened, and I don't know how it will. She knows she can grow her soul back, but she's missing. We haven't been able to find her. Is she trying to heal? Or hiding from us? Wanting to stay curled up the way she is forever? She's not unlike Mara, hiding in that cocoon of grief for too long. This Maud doesn't know how that story ends, but future Maud will. I am looking at a future where I get resolution, where I see how Ariana's story ends for good or evil. Someday. I know we will cross paths again, and I wonder what it will look like. I hope she fights and gets herself back. My heart was full as I returned about an hour later to the secret basement. Wrath and Mara were cleaning in the parlour, a Victrola blaring music. Wrath had a feather duster. As he whirled through the room dusting, he seized Mara and dipped her backwards. I smiled and left them to the glorious process of becoming themselves again. He was more human than ever now. Scotland thought that someday he would be completely restored. I was just tiptoeing down the hall when I ran into Mr. McGillicuddy. He was one of the first to come back to our side, along with Rupert and Matthew John, of course, and he carried a hat box down the hall. Where should I put this, Maud? He said. I don't know, I said. Aren't you the leader? Oh, not any more, Mr. McGillicuddy said. That's you. And he smiled and walked away. I went deep into the heart of the secret basement, into the lush, velvety lilac scent of darkness, and I sat on a bench. The silence rustled. I felt my heart fill. Suddenly, from behind a row of potted trees, not unlike the time he had appeared from behind the coat rack, Noble materialized. Hi, I said. Hi, he said. Feeling overwhelmed? He sat down beside me. No, I said. I am overjoyed to be alive. I think I have found the center. He settled with his back against the wall. The silence glowed. I put my head down on his shoulder. I shut my eyes. I felt at home. This concludes McGillicuddy and Murder's Pawn Shop. There are more adventures waiting at minervasweeneyren.com. Thank you so much for being Maud's Diary and for listening.